How's that?
Yeah, okay.
I think it helps you get along better.
I'm game.
Right?
Right.
Sometimes
We get along so well, and sometimes you're extreme right, I'm extreme left, I'm liberal, you're a conservative, and yet we get along so well. That's marvelous, wonderful.
That's amazing.
That's amazing.
Okay.
Amazing grace.
So today,
That saved a wretch.
like you. So today, what we're going to do.
That's good. Come on, talk to me. Get in that microphone.
What we're going to do is trying to give you a little example of
Give me an example of
this versus that thing.
Would he have said,
didn't want
come
to
on,
know.
Hillary, vote for me, baby?
No.
wasn't
I don't
doing
know. I don't know about that.
Okay, here we are once again. My wife is not here, which is not good, but she will be here a little bit later. Let me bring Daryl in. Hello, Daryl.
Hello. Does that mean I have to be that this morning?
You have to be that?
You're this. You need a that, don't you?
Right. We needed that. Okay, that works.
All right.
Sounds good. Hello, Diana.
Good morning, Dr. Jones. How you be?
Well, I tell you what, still trying to get over this flare-up of high blood pressure, and so maybe I can.
I hope things are improving.
Yeah.
Slightly even.
Yeah. Day at a time, day at a time. This morning, we're going to be brief. I'm going to pull up a passage. We're going to deal with it. It's, in my opinion, something that has to do with what we call theology. Many people have been talking about, let's say, the term God for a long, long time. When I say the term, it's been used in various ways. In other words, when the Greeks talked about it, we're talking about theos. When other people of other languages talked about God, they used different words for that notion. In fact, we find this in the book we call Bereshith. Sometimes we call that book Genesis. But I want you to put on the table what you think to be the case when it comes to God. What have you discovered that God might be, Diana?
Mostly, I have to say that in my experience, I've seen God as what people define God to be. I mean, even myself, they might need a particular entity for a particular purpose and define it that way to either advance their own argument or to make themselves feel better or whatever. I know that that's not necessarily the right way to do it, but I don't see very many people that are really giving a lot of thought to the question. And this is why I like being here, because at least here we've got the chance to give thought to the question of what is God? And just take it from there.
Daryl, put on the table what you think to be the case, that is, when it comes to what you've heard over the years concerning God. What would that look like?
Well, a lot of what I've heard and believed in the past is in my past. There was a time, when I thought that more evidence that you had that God was with you and on your side, then the better you were doing in this life. I've gone from that to still giving, in my own thinking anyway, a great possibility that there is someone there at all times that we can more or less tap into. But if that is the case, it's something that's very hard to define, difficult to really nail down, but could very well be just kind of at the core, possibly helping us through this life. As far as having a God, if you just wanted to something to consider to be God, I think it would be okay to consider that to be everything that's good, anything that is beneficial toward ourselves and toward others. It'd be okay to kind of put that on a pedestal and say, "This is God. Let's live here."
Okay, I stated this, and it was before 1982, and I was thinking about it. I was trying to remember back when I was actually involved in a revival, believe it or not, and it was a weird one, to say the least. It was in a bowling alley. Lots of people were on the outside, could not get in, but we had lots and lots of speakers, and I'm talking about the kind of, I'm trying to think, I think we were using Altec Lansing speakers back in that day. However, we did have a big 24 channel mixer that wasn't Altec, but we were using the Altec Lansing speakers. But to make a long story short, very, very short, it was at that meeting that I was wrestling. I was wrestling with, the Hebrew would suggest this, and yet we're talking about that. In the great debate, I feel like this is the way that I feel. I feel like people who are arguing theism and atheism, for the most part, they're talking about this. They're not talking about that. And what I'm talking about when it comes to that, an articulate approach to the text is not what you hear in the great debate. When philosophers address the many things that are suggested, that is, in the ancient text, some philosophers overreach in that they are claiming that some of these authors are making a philosophical claim. And so, the debate gets into what is a claim, a philosophical claim. Some people would articulate, issues of sentence and so on and deep structure, but I'm not going to get into that debate this morning. I would like to have that when I have some philosophers on who could defend their positions, because there are various ways of looking at the same thing. And when I talk about being multi-axial, I'm talking about if an axis is a coherent whole, characterized namely as a collection, if you will, or a sequence or a progression of values or whatever, that typically is what I'm thinking about when I'm talking about axis. And so if you can look at that as you could have multiple, and yes, we do. Everything doesn't rest upon the same axis, and therefore one would be, multi-axial. I've been committed to a process for a long, long time. I've seen that working with conclusions and through conclusions is how we get from point A to point B and how we progress. Back in, I think, 78 or 79, when I was speaking, and so many people came to Jesus, not a whole lot. We're talking about 13 or 14 that night out of a crowd that was hundreds of people there. But I made this statement, and I'll never forget this because I copied this down. It was written in one of my Bibles. It's very, very old. That is old to me. It's actually a Bible that my father gave to me, which I'm quite fond of, simply because he gave it to me. He's the awesome one. But I had jotted down for that particular sermon, I said, God is no more than an abstraction of the idea by which people have oriented themselves to produce a functional society. And when I made that statement, I could see a lot of ministers in the audience. They looked at me, and it was almost like they had this look. It's, what the hell? Have you ever seen people who had that look, Daryl? What the hell? What are you saying?
Yeah, once or twice.
It's almost like a deer, if you've ever seen a deer crossing the road and they look at you and they see your headlights and they go, ah! It was almost that kind of look. And so I went on, and I realized back then I could not say what I wanted to say. I'm very much like my father in this sense. In church life, you feel like you're walking on eggshells all the time. You really can't talk about what you see in the text or whatever. You have to kind of play ball with their ism. It's very much like theism and atheism. You know, you have the atheist over here and the theist over here, and they're playing ball within their isms. And that's not a put down. Please understand, one of the things that I admire these days is that people can say, I'm an atheist without getting in a lot of trouble. Now, some people are getting into a lot of trouble, and they can't even confess this before their family members because their family members will walk away. That's pitiful. But I think that it's about time that we challenge ourselves. And I don't think that the landscape of atheism and theism is so much about challenging ourselves, that is, with the question, that is, of God. Because so many people want to play ball with, does God exist? If so, where's the evidence? You know, I think that's a very immature approach. Where's the evidence? When you look at theology outside of the landscape of fundamentalism, fundamentalism certainly wants to characterize God. He creates this heaven and the earth, or the heavens and the earth, and there's a debate as to whether you should translate that heaven or heavens. Morphologically, it would be, we can look at it and say, well, you should look at heavens as opposed to heaven. But what is the author actually intending here? And so you have a lot of debate over plural usage, that is in Hebrew. For instance, I used the word theos a while ago. That's in the singular form, so no one has a big problem with that because that's a singular God. Because I guess morphologically it makes sense. Usage makes more sense in that context to make it singular. And some of you guys will get what I'm saying. In other words, you can say a term like Elohim, it's in the plural, but your intent is for people to understand that it's but one God. Elohim in the plural, it was used over and over again by many authors, many speakers, as meaning simply judges. And so if you were talking about a group of judges, we could say Elohim. That would refer to judges. And so in order to make the distinction between judges and God, how do we make the distinction? And so what we found, or what we find actually in the Hebrew text, is we don't find people trying to create this brand new word for God in this sense. And some people would say, well, when you look at the construction of Yah or Yahweh or Yahweh, you see the tetragrammaton, it's, more or less God in a different sense. Well, most people would articulate, that is in theology, that's the personal name of. In other words, Daryl has a name, so I can call him Daryl. And Diana has a name, so I can say, hello, Diana, how are you doing? And so, people were thinking along those lines. They were thinking about, wow, what can we do? And most of the time when people read Yahweh or Yah, or, depends on which text they're reading, they're not given to trying to understand what people were doing with, let's say, that particular usage. If I wanted to make something extremely anthropomorphic, something that I could wrap my mind around, that is in human terms, would I not put a name to it, like, hello, Harry? Would that make sense to you, Diana?
Oh, absolutely it does. You want a referent that is convenient in the same way as the referent Diana is quite convenient to refer to me. It doesn't necessarily refer to every aspect of me, but at least we know who we're talking about when we use it.
Right. And so, the challenge here is, when you're looking, throughout the text, Elohim, for a translator's trying to tease out, what's going on here? We have Elohim here, but, you have Bereshith, which is the prepositional phrase. We have bara, which is the verb. It's in the singular, but Elohim is in the plural. Are we talking about judges created, or are we talking about God created? And, that's a good question. And so some people would, run it through the let's say, the mill of theology. In other words, let's theologically drive the text, and let's say that this is the majestic plural, and so it's majestic, and you can't describe God just in singular form. You have to use plural form. And this is with fundamentalists. This is the way that they explain this. This is the majestic plural, which is nonsense. The manner in which the inflection happens in this nominal structure is to indicate that there's something a bit metaphorical happening here. You're trying to, it's like if I say something in the present tense in English, and if I want to emphasize it to make it an emphatic present, it's much different than the simple present or the progressive present, correct? And so the same thing is true in a nominal structured language. Sometimes you do not inflect within the verb itself, but you inflect within, let's say, the subject, something that would intensify the manner in which you would use the verb so it becomes known, whether it's emphatic or simple or whatever. It becomes a little bit more telling, and in this sense, this would be the metaphorical pathway. Does that make sense to either one of you?
I think it does.
In other words,
Yeah.
if I said blepo to you, I could translate that as I see, or I am seen, or I do see. The latter would be the what? The emphatic present, correct? If I
Yeah.
said I am seen, that would be the progressive. If I said I see, that would be the simple present. That's something that English speakers can wrap their minds around. And so
And
blepo
German is
being,
very much like that also.
right. Now blepo being
They
one,
can
right.
have all those meanings.
Right. And blepo being one word, it has an embed. Well, where's the embed? The ending, the omega would be the subject. The subject is first person. Okay, and I can say, I see blepo, and that's easy to see. And so, when I get into an inflected language, it's interesting. But, I can supply. You just don't have to work with embed. You can do all kinds of things to make sure that the one hearing you or reading what you're writing can understand whether this present morphological construct is emphatic or not. And you might do that with another word, correct?
Yeah, absolute.
Right. And so this is true not just in Greek and Hebrew. This is true with other languages. And so the trick is, and it's not really a trick, but the point is, with other words, what we do is we try to put together syntagmatically. In other words, we're trying to spell things out in a manner in which we can have some consistency. And this is the way that the Hebrew writers wrote. And my point being would be, this is not a term that was, part of a determinate nomenclature. This was a term that had been used for a long, long time. They were wrestling, in a sense, at multiple tribes trying to come together, trying to find a pathway to civility. You're trying to find a pathway to civility, but you're not there yet, okay? And so you're writing things in poetic structure. You're using, metaphor to get it there, simply because you know that you can't be too rigid. You can't be too dogmatic. Does that make any sense to either one of you?
I think so. I do think so.
Okay. Now, there are several ways of looking at this object, but I wanted to put on the table this. I'm going to read this from the NIV just to make something extremely simple for the people who do like this show. And if you like this show and what we do, I would ask you to support it financially. Yeah. We're not Jim Baker and Tammy Baker. We're not trying to be Richard Dawkins. We're not going to form the four horsemen of atheism or theism or anything like that. What we're trying to do is we're trying to be a community of people who learn how to work together. We want diversity. We want a pluralistic approach to everything. We're not about just one cup of tea, okay? Some of us like coffee. Some of us like Dr. Pepper, believe it or not, okay? And I like plum wine. That's a good wine, by the way. But let me say this. I'm going to read it from the NIV. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. the fundamentalists are going to take this, and also people in atheism typically take it this way. This is a passage about creationism. Would you agree with that?
The way fundamentalists, many of them use it, yeah, definitely.
Okay, now let me push back on that a bit. Bara, technically speaking, isn't the term that one would use in Hebrew to put a model of creationism together. This is actually a term that was used, for the most part, that would suggest, hey, if we're going to try to preface the manner in which we could deal with something, especially in a poetic set, this is a word that could be useful. In other words, if we are to come together and get extremely creative, and just as much as we try to be understood, let's try to understand where they were. They were people who were not all on the same page, coming from different tribes, trying to get along. They have to become extremely creative, okay, so that they can have some things in common to resonate with. Do you get that?
Yeah.
Okay, how about you, Daryl?
Sure, makes sense.
Okay, now try to get all of your kids to resonate with something so everyone can go on vacation or just to do whatever. Sometimes what we have to do is we have to find, these common grounds, if you will, correct? And so sometimes to find out what's common and what's not, we kind of tease things out a bit, do we not? And so the preface of this book here, if we're going to look through the Masoretic pointing system, and please understand that we could look at, the Ezra model and two other models of pointing systems, that is vowel pointing, and the rendering would be different. But I'm just going to make a point because this translation is modeled after the tradition of the Masoretes' work. Okay, now listen to this. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless, empty, darkness over the surface of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw that the light was good and separated the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning the first day. Now, one thing that happens, I read all the way through verse 5, didn't intend to, I just wanted to read verse 3. My point is, when you read this, anyone who understands anything about First and Second Temple Hebrew understands that that first verse is completely disconnected from the second verse. And the second verse is completely disconnected from the third verse. Now, if you erase the first verse, and if you erase the second verse, and you just started reading, and God said, let there be light, if you had not been thinking about creation at all, Diana or Daryl, would you assume that this is creation, or is this maybe a narrative that's going somewhere? Well, when you look carefully at the structure, you can write this down and look at the structure poetically. You're going to see that the author speaks about it and then becomes extremely cyclic, and then you'll see another image, and then you'll see another image. In other words, what you see is you see image placed within image, within image, within image. The imagery here is wonderful. And so, do we really get a taste of what we're talking about in the great debate, creationism, in chapter 1, 2, and 3 of the book of Genesis? Not really. If we look at verse 1, we see something that's very telling. The authors are simply saying, hey, listen, if we're going to preface this, we're going to have to be extremely metaphorical. And in this approach, this is what we have. Okay, then you disconnect that. Do both of you get what I'm suggesting here, or do I need to explain a bit more?
Oh, I think I got the disconnection in the sense that when I come home in the evening, it's dark, everything's turned off. I'll open the door, come through it, reach to the light switch, and as I flip it, I will call out, "Lux fiat," let there be light. And that doesn't mean that I'm creating any light. I mean,
Right.
the light source is already there. The room is already there. I'm just saying, let's have some light so I can see where the hell I'm going. I don't know. Is that God doing that sort of thing?
Well, see, I think you're making a valuable point if you say "let there be." That doesn't articulate an argument of dealing with creation at all. It's almost as if Diana's just walking in a room and dealing with what's there. Correct?
Yeah, that's what I'm after.
That's the point. You got the point. Do you agree with that, Daryl?
Yeah, that makes sense too.
Okay. Now, verse 3 is about what's there. Correct?
Yeah, we'll go
Yeah.
with that, definitely.
Okay. Let's just go with that. And so, if we could
Just-
call anything from verse 3 on, it would be, let's just deal with what's here, okay? It's almost like sometimes on this show, sometimes I say to people, let's just deal with what is. Is a big word. Let me give an example. Let me pull out another Bible. And this is why I'm so skeptical of the great debate. I think it's people who are engaged in it, in my opinion, are taking an inarticulate approach to the question, number one, an inarticulate approach to the things that have been written concerning God. And it concerns me much in every way. And so, yes, very, very sophisticated philosophers are full of shit. I'm joking. Come on, let's give me a break. I'm just saying sometimes philosophers would rather work within their own field without the consideration of what people are saying in other disciplines. Does that make sense, Diana or Daryl?
Sure.
Well, they've got to make a living. They've got to write something. So
they've got to get your juices up. And so, I get that philosophers want to be the ones who call the shots, but that's not always good. I love philosophy, by the way. I want to have a show on the philosophy of philosophy, the philosophy of theology, and so on. And we will have soon, and we're going to have some major league players on those shows. Okay. A passage that so many people go to simply to look at this thing as something that might be analogous to would be John 1:1. Kata Iowanein, to be technical. Enarchein halagos kai halagos ein prostantheon kai theos ein halagos. There you go. You have it in Greek. Now let's look at what that might mean. Now, we're dealing with an aquative verb here. If I said in the beginning was the word, I would be saying to you that's probably not what the Greek author meant at all. The word was in English. We look at this as a construct. An aquative verb is very different than a transitive verb and an intransitive verb, correct? Hello.
Okay, well, this is a little beyond my pen, so
Okay,
I'm going to
now-
defer to you on this.
Okay, just a minute. I'm talking about 3rd and 4th grade English. What's the difference between an aquative verb, ergative verb, a transitive verb, and a transitive verb? That's 3rd and 4th grade English.
Okay, I missed a lot in 3rd and 4th grade then because I'm not
Come
knowing
on.
what an
Okay.
aquative verb is.
Okay, now what I'm suggesting in a classical, in classical schools, they teach in almost every classical school that I know of, in the 3rd and the 4th grade, one of the things that you're taught is the difference between an aquative, ergative, and transitive and intransitive. Let's just go over a couple of these ideas first. If I said transitive, if I said I hit the ball, well, that's pretty neat, right? Okay? That means that there is this direct object out there, correct?
Yeah, transitive and intransitive I get. I did
Okay,
learn
then I don't
those.
need to explain those two, right? Let me just
Right.
explain for a moment aquative. Okay, if I say Billy Bob is president. That doesn't look like transitive or intransitive, correct?
Right, that's referring to a state.
It can be referring to a state, yes, in English. And so sometimes we call it, and sometimes we can look at it almost like an equal sign. We can say sometimes they're not convertible. In other words, for instance, if I said the Word was God, okay, am I saying that the Word was God, therefore God was the Word? In other words, can you swap them? In other words, when you look at a predicate nominative, with acquative verbs, typically in English what we do is we make the predicate nominative much, much larger than what the subject is. It's like, hey, Harry is a football player. Well, not all football players are Harry, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Right.
And so what we do with that nominative, predicate nominative, we can do all kinds of things. We can, put an adjective there. We can just take it to the moon, if you will. And so that acquative is a wonderful thing that we work with in English. And I don't want to get stuck in grammar here. Therefore, I'm going to put the explanation of the ergative and all of this in the details on another show. But I simply want to make a point. In Greek, ein, or let's say the acquative verb, doesn't suggest being. Now, a lot of people, in English, when they say, "Is there a God?" and "is" carries a lot of baggage. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, the dictionary definition is like
Okay.
paragraph after paragraph.
But let me show you what I'm talking about. If someone said there is a God, simply because of the way that it's framed, most people would assume that if you say there is a God, you're saying that a God exists, correct?
That's the way I've always understood it to
Okay.
be, yeah.
Well,
Obviously, I have some things to learn here.
okay, well, technically in English that's not true. And number two, in Greek, that's far from being true, okay? Any Greek reader understands that the acquatives don't work that way because they gave enough room for that which was well outside of the understanding of existence so they could entertain a bit of debate, if you will. And so when John writes, this NRK logos, is he saying that this logos is in a state of being? The answer to that question is no. And so the ontological arguments and so on and so on and so on, they fail miserably because this is a measurement by which we're trying to do out of this anthropomorphic means, correct?
Okay, I think I'm getting you.
Okay. And so when we are trying to get things that we can relate to, in other words, existence is something that I can relate to, Billy Bob. I mean, that's where they are. But when it comes to the usage, the many usages, let's say, of acquative verbs in Greek, this is not so much about existence. And this is why, certain terms are used within the fabric of the text that I will get into on another show, because I want to put together something that's much better than the ideas of creation or creationism, simply because I think they've been overused by fundamentalists, and I think too many people are being sidetracked or derailed or put on the shelf for some reason because it's just not working for them. That is, in being articulate, that is, in understanding or exegeting this text. And so my point is, in John, we don't even have a case for being or an argument for being. And so we have both logos and theos, not in the context of being or existence. And yet most people would suggest, when they read the English, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, they would say, yeah, those are, someone's making an existence claim, correct?
Okay, yeah.
So if you get what I'm saying, and maybe I'm just all over the place, my blood pressure is really, really high right now, and I may be just speaking poorly, and you guys are going to have to forgive me. NCG is about having shows to where we can make mistakes, and people need to understand, a lot of the people who have been on the plays over the years who are very articulate, they practice and practice and practice and practice and practice how to say things. And so when they come on the show, they have practiced it so many times, it sounds very articulate, but it's almost like what an actor does. I would rather someone be authentic, and this is why I loved Wednesday night. Ozzy is so authentic, Stephen is so authentic, but at times, a lot of the language is broken, isn't it? It's not perfect. And that's the thing that I love about doing live shows, because, the expectation is not perfection, or perfectionism, if you will. And so here, what I'm trying to say is this. If I read something into this passage, if I read it from Greek, in archeino logos, kai logos, and so on, this is not talking about existence. John is talking well outside of the scope and sequence, or whatever kind of notion that we have concerning existence or being. And so when people start talking about, well, does God exist? I don't see any evidence. Well, if you're outside of, let's say, the axis of existence or being, why would you think that you would have evidence, Diana?
Okay, let me get over here. Yeah, I was looking at the chat bar. As far as evidence goes, I was going to try to get back to that. What I'm looking for is in the way people use their God to justify their positions. And I'm asking, okay, how is it that you know that your position, let's my favorite subject, your position against people like me, LGBT, is divinely ordained. What do you have to go on with that? That's where I'm coming from with evidence.
Okay, but Ann Nyland, a wonderful lexical theorist, has proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that no one within the biblical rite, W-R-I-T-E, with all the collection of books that are there, no one was speaking against homosexuals or people in transition or whatever. And so the only people who would articulate that would be fundies. So we should be able to take that off the table, right? And so if we look at the community that's actually articulate to the text, actually disciplined within the text, they're not making those points. The only people making those points are these bastards on the side of the road. Does that make sense?
That makes all the sense in the world.
Okay.
And this is why I'd like to see them really come here and do some listening. Although I
can get them on, but what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to get atheists and theists to work together within, let's say, measured disciplines that is concerning the text. In other words, why not have atheists and theists alike who are measured in the languages, who can actually articulate what is there and not there, and who would suggest that, we need to be skeptical in certain areas, but one of the things that we can say with certainty, a good deal of certainty, please understand my usage there, we can say that there was no bashing of homosexuals or whatever. That's something that was invented later on. And that's what, some church fundies wanted, and that's very, very unfortunate. We do find that in translations, but that's just a case of ignorance. It's like, okay, but it's like, I'm not offended by flat earthers, okay? I feel sorry for them, and I would encourage you to feel sorry for those people who are so ignorant to the text. Do you get where I'm going with this?
Yeah, I am neither offended by flat earthers. I just want to know what they're smoking, because I don't want any of that stuff.
Okay, but I get that, but you don't need to be worried about these people who are bashing the LGBTQ community at all. Why? Because these people are like the flat earthers, correct?
Well, the people bashing the LGBT community have a little more political pull than the flat earthers do.
Okay, I realize they have Mike Pence as one of their champions. I get that. But let me see if I can put this well. Most of our politicians who use, let's say, the Bible, they use it to pitch a point that's not there in the text. Politicians have used the Bible as a means to speak, and when they pull it completely out of context, they build another context for usage, correct? And so, in a sense, we should let the
definitely correct.
politicians stay within the, wherever they are. And I understand the herd of the fundamentalists, that's huge, but it's dwindling. I mean, the fundamentalist, I don't think, and I stand to be corrected, I don't think that that's becoming larger and larger. And I'm simply saying I have every reason to say if I wanted Eric Hovind and his father on this show to talk about Genesis 1, 2, and 3, I mean, there would be no contest when it comes to their understanding of the text. And when it comes to biology, I could bring on, just an average biologist, and Dr. Hovind would look silly simply because he has he's trying to read his theological understanding into biology, if that makes sense.
Right. And he has been made to look silly many times. It's unfortunate that he doesn't get the point. And more importantly than that, those who follow him don't get that point.
Okay, but just as poorly as Dr. Ken Hovind has read his theological mindsets or his theology into biology, isn't it true that many people in atheism and theism have read their notions of existence into what these authors were suggesting about, let's say, God?
Oh, sure. I see that all the time.
Okay.
I don't know whether it's them doing it on their own or as a reaction to what's going on, but yes, it does happen.
Okay, so my point is, and let me bring Daryl in. Daryl, can you see that a lot of people are just confused? I'm talking about extremely confused because they don't have a clue as to what's in the text. And when people for instance, if someone made the point, okay, we have logos, we have theos, this is well beyond the scope of an axis that we can deal with. And so what are we going to do with it? We can speak about it poetically, but that's it. So who's going to get uptight about that? Is someone making go to a poets convention and ask them, are you guys making a philosophical claim about blah, blah, blah? And they will laugh at you simply because the intention of poetry is to give, namely the reader, the ability to render it however they want to in some way, correct?
Well, most churchgoers, feel like they're dealing with something very literal. That's what's always promoted. That's what's always taught. The thing that, to me, that contributes to the confusion is if you're going to try to shine such a bad light on homosexuality, then why is it seem to be so much worse than adultery and the things that, it almost seems like Jesus made light of in one sense when he said, if a man's looked at a woman, as if he has a desire there, he's committed it. And then Paul comes along and says the big issue is judging one another, condemning one another. So I think the point is totally being missed.
Right. I agree. For instance, let me ask this question. If you have, let's take this in a literal sense. Now the earth was formless. Talk to me, Diana. What does that mean?
Well, to me, that means that, okay, there's no form to the earth, so there's really no way to observe it or define it. So why are you calling it earth in the first place?
Okay,
I mean,
it's
so
formless.
maybe-
Okay, it's formless and empty.
Yeah, so what the hell is it?
That's the point.
Yeah.
This is the point that John chapter 3 makes so well. That is, when Jesus is talking to Nicodemus, he's trying to bring out an agnostic point, and Nicodemus is so Gnostic, and he doesn't get the agnostic point that Jesus is articulating. And the same thing is true here. Okay, you have an earth, it's formless. Make your argument. It's empty, okay? And some people can say, well, I can go into the Hebrew and I can do this and that. Okay, come on this show and do it, okay? I challenge you. Now, listen to this. Okay, in English, we're doing the English it this morning. It's formless, it's empty. Now, here we have dark, okay? If you have the absence of light, let's pretend like light doesn't exist. Let's keep reading. And the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. If you take away light and you have H2O, is it going to be water?
Well, the water's still going to be water, even if you can't see it. I mean, if you happen to
Okay,
walk into a
what
puddle
happens
that
when you
can't
take
see,
away
your feet
light?
are still going to get wet.
Okay, let's say we take away our heat source. What do you have?
Well, you're going to be very cold, first of all, and quite
Right.
uncomfortable.
Right. Now, when people explain this, are they explaining this as, oh, God is hovering over ice? I'm trying to be funny here. Okay. But what you hear from fundies is God is hovering over the waters, and yet we don't even have the thing that keeps it, somewhat warm to keep from being ice. I'm just making
Yeah.
a funny point, okay? That's not at
Yeah.
all. This is not at all what the Hebrew is articulating. The Hebrew is actually articulating an issue of being, we don't know. We don't know. In other words, the premise, the preface and the premise of this wonderful book that I call Bereshit, other people call it Genesis, is to say we're going to speak about this metaphorically, and guess what? We just don't know. So we have verse 1, making it metaphorical. Verse 2, we're up in the air. It doesn't even come together. Now, God said, let there be light. Let's work with God in this context. Okay, what kind of God do we have? Are these people not admitting we're dealing with this metaphorically? We're dealing with something that we don't know anything about, correct? And so they write this poetically with, it's almost written in a way that we could say we have Olympic circles. Some things are in common, some things are not. And it's cyclic. It's not based upon time's arrow, but it's based upon a cyclic sense of understanding. Those people thought whatever took place here would ultimately come back around, okay? And this is the manner in which it was written, okay? Why do we have atheists even approaching this text as if this is a good creation model or a creation model at all? Doesn't make sense to me.
Well, neither does it make sense to me. And
Yes.
I keep saying that a lot of us are attacking what the fundies are saying. And
Okay.
I know that's a limited look. And you want a broader perspective.
Okay, but why not just be,
You're causing all the damage.
but why not just say, I'm not a fundy?
I wish the fundies would, but
No,
that's
no,
beside the
I'm
point.
simply saying, why are people who identify with atheism, they are identifying, sometimes I think that there is a lot of confusion. I think some people are saying, what the fundies are saying, I'm not that, therefore I'm an atheist. It would be better for them to say, I'm not a fundy.
Oh, right, absolutely.
In other words, in the text here, why would you not want to be a person who can participate in the poetry and the building up of community? Let me read what I said back in 78 or 79. God is no more than the abstraction of the idea by which people have oriented themselves to produce a functional society. If we use God as a rhetorical device to do what I just said, and these people did, that's where I got the idea after reading Hebrew over and over again. I said, this is what's going on. And so if you use God as a rhetorical device, are you making a philosophical claim that God exists? Do you
Not
see how
necessarily,
ignorant
right.
some of this stuff is? And this is why I'm saying so many people are inarticulate as to the text, inarticulate as to the question of God, and their approach has been, oh, I'm this atheist. That's not what's going on. What you're doing is you're upset with what the fundies have done. I can get that. I'm not a fundy. I was stuck in it. I was born in it. Maybe I'm still a fundamentalist. I don't know it. I don't know. I'm crazier than hell, though. And I know that I have just shaggy, ugly white hair. But my point is, why can't we just say, I'm not a fundamentalist? Rather than
Right.
saying, oh, I'm not a theist. Now, if you read carefully, some of these people are trying to use God as a means of doing something for civility, correct?
Yeah, now we're getting there with that. Yes.
So that's starting to make sense. And so if we do this kind of stuff, trying to work with this and trying to see that this is part of the evolutionary process, why are people trying to get rid of religion? And this is why I really applauded what Ozzy said the other night, Wednesday night on the show, concerning what Jonathan Haidt wrote. It was a great statement, and we're going to push it back up because I think that what he said was brilliant. Both Ozzy and Jonathan Haidt. Jonathan Haidt said this: I believe that while there is no God or external intelligence, I believe that we humans, just a minute, let me push over so I can get the entire quote. We humans do better when we can orient ourselves around common goals, common purposes, common ideals. I believe our brains evolve with cultures so that we have religious brains, that we are designed to be immersed in a religious cultures. In other words, religion is not a trick or a disease, as Richard Dawkins and Daniel Dennett tell us. I mean, this guy's an atheist, and he's going after Daniel Dennett and Richard Dawkins. He goes on to say, religion is an adaptation. It's one that we have freed ourselves in some ways, and then we're puzzled as to why most of our fellow citizens, at least in the United States, cling to it. So I believe that in our community of liberal secular scientists, we will not progress. So Dr. Haidt is saying that liberal secular scientists will not progress. Why? We will not understand the true nature of society until we open up our minds, especially to religious ideas, not that there is a God, but that religion is adaptive. This is why I keep saying, when you look at the landscape of all of the writings within, let's say, just the Bible itself, these people are not writing in concert. They're not in concord. They are all over the place. But we see people being adaptive. Hello.
Yeah, was it Ozzy who said it, or am I thinking of someone else when I'm thinking of the person who said, religion isn't going anywhere. I mean, it's part of us.
Right.
Now, what I'd like to see is, a change in the way people use it.
Right. Now, Haidt said, but that religion is adaptive. Our brains are built for it, and if we're going to find ways to live both with religious diversity and to make a space for atheists like me, we need to understand what religion does and what are some workable alternatives to it. In other words, he's simply saying we have to work with, not against. The Freedom from Religion Foundation, its mission seems to be just against. They're trying to shut down everything. It doesn't make sense to me. And so hopefully we've had a pretty good show. Now, question, Daryl, what say you about what we're talking about? Do you run into a lot of people overreaching when it comes to the question of God?
Oh, absolutely. As a matter of fact, in sometimes I think it's just this idea that okay, let's just say there's a God, and even though we can't prove it in any way necessarily, it seems like the issue boils down to he's defined to us what's right and what's wrong. In other words, we come up with this term that we call sin, and that's what we hold against one another. Rather than, as it sounds to me like you were just saying, that religion is adaptive. Well, if you've claimed a God who has defined sin for us, then that rules out adapting to anything. We already know what's good, we know what's bad, and let's get rid of the bad people and hail the good people, and etc.
Diane, I'm going to put you on the spot. I enjoyed what you just said, Daryl, by the way. That was really, really good. I'm going to put you on the spot because you've said over and over again you're an atheist. My definition of God in this sense, God is no more than the abstraction of the idea by which people have oriented themselves to produce a functional society. After reading that, and with some of the things that I've said concerning the text and what Dr. Jonathan Haidt said, are you an atheist to the point in which I'm suggesting God is?
Okay, to that point, I guess I would have to say no. If God is simply this.
This is fun, isn't it? Isn't
Say
this
again?
fun? I said, this is fun, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, it's if you define God in the way Haidt does.
See, I really don't
would
think
have to
that
say no,
people
I'm not.
understand the complexity of who Bob is. Bob sometimes is saying the same thing that atheists are, and yet sometimes they're so upset at Bob because he's speaking in a very articulate way about the question of God, and he realizes that he has nothing, and he admits that. And I think that it would do us all a lot of good if we would simply say, I don't have anything. But why take people who have used God as a literary device, not trying to come up with a new word? They're going to borrow Elohim. That was a word that had been used over and over again. It was the judges. Now they turn it into God. Does that sound like people who want to say, oh, yeah, this is the one and only God? It doesn't. When you read the syntax, their usage of it is so far away from what we hear in fundamentalism. So yes, I get that atheists perhaps need to rethink. Maybe they are just against fundamentalism, and maybe they are suspending judgment to the question. Hello. I think
Well, I'm certainly against fundamentalism,
Do you see
or
what-
at least the way fundamentalism is used.
in other words, I would suggest to atheists, say I reject fundamentalists on both sides of the coin. But when it comes to the question of God, I mean, what do we have? I keep saying we have nothing compelling, and yet other people, they will approach the Old Testament, and I've heard it on my justification of atheism, and here I hear a spin out of the Old Testament that's so far removed from what's actually there, and I'm saying, okay, we have people who want to say that they have reason being so unreasonable and making this claim. I just don't get it. And so I'm pulling my hair out, and I need your help. And yesterday I made a lot of mistakes in what I said. And if you can get past the doctrine of perfectionism, you'll forgive me, and we can move forward together. We're out of time. But Daryl, make your final comment.
Well, first of all, I've been making a list of all the mistakes you made so that I can hold them against you and prove you wrong. Like I actually caught any. But
I thought love doesn't keep a record of wrongs.
it was, yeah, see, I was thinking that I was being fundy there, I think.
Well,
Anyway, I had the unique opportunity this week of speaking to a group of people that are still a part of the thing that I used to in the way of commune, and because the man in charge of all that passed away this week, and it was a very unique opportunity for me because of the fact that I was able to express actually respect and appreciation for the man that they were honoring, and even express the fact that I learned much from that man. But I was able to be honest enough to not be specific about exactly what I learned and to treat them as just fellow human beings that are quite possibly experiencing some of the things that I have in the past, and feel like that I've found, a better pathway to take since those days I was involved in it. But I kept myself open for relationship. And that was my goal, to let these people know, look, I care about you. I'm the same as you. And it seemed to be very successful. I'm thinking maybe I made some new friends that quite possibly for a few years thought that I would be very much against them. So that's the kind of things that really motivate me.
Thank you very much, Daryl. And I tell you what, I need that phone number so I can call George.
All right.
Okay.
I'll get that to you.
Hey, with that said, we're out of here. We've enjoyed having you here. If you're committed to a process, not a conclusion, if you resonate with some of the things that we're doing here, if you want to, let's say, build a modality, if you will, that rises above where most of us find ourselves, I'm going to ask you once again to support NCG. We're not perfect. Perhaps that makes sense to you. And so we like, substantive chat, but it shouldn't be all about God. We've got some greater things to accomplish in life than just sitting around talking about God notions. And so if you want to see something like NCG that's heavily invested in humanity, doing something so we can, meet the needs of humanity. So many people are going without. And so if you'd like to do that, look at the donate link somewhere in the description or something like that, okay? Hey, thanks. We'll see you again. Bye-bye tonight.
Take care, everyone.
Yeah, bye-bye.